You guys have already completed a worksheet where you did a lot of research on screws and drill bits and the different types of fasteners and the different types of drill bits. And so now we're going to talk about is kind of where those things are in our shop, how to find them, how to identify them, and how to use them. The first step is simply knowing where the drill bits are. So in the back corner of our shop, drill presses right here, we have this cabinet that hangs on the wall. That is where all of our drill bits are. There's little white tubes up there that hold the drill bits. And on the right-hand side, right here, are what we call simply like your hole identification. And we'll talk more about these, but they have all the different holes and they're labeled. And this is what we use to identify the different sizes of drill bits. Now that you know where the drill bits are, the next thing is making sure that we can identify what drill bits we're using and how all that works. The easiest way to identify a drill bit is when they are simply stamped right into it. So that one we can see is 19/64, 19/64. That's the size drill bit we have. On this one, we have a little bit harder to read. It's lightly stamped in there. And then like on an older bit like this that's rusted, we're gonna have very little chance seeing what's stamped into it. This one is extremely small. Again, there's no way we're gonna be able to read a stamped imprint like we can on a bigger bit like this. So what do we do then? That's where these hole guides come in. And basically what we have here is, if you take your bit, let's start with the hardest one, the rusted one. See if we get a little better angle here. We'll start with the rusted one. And all you do, start any size hole that you know the bit's gonna fit into. And then I work my way down, going smaller each time. And it fits through all those easy. And I finally hit one where it doesn't fit. Go back to the last one, okay? And then on that one, let's see if we can. It's hard to see, but that says 1/4 right next to it. We could do the same thing, a metal one, doesn't really change anything. Start big, work our way down. I'm working my way down. There's the last one that it can fit in. And you can see there a little bit better that it says 1/4. So that's how I identify the drill bits. On something smaller, it's the same thing. I don't do anything different. Start big and I work my way down, work my way down. Found one that it can't fit into. So right there on that one says 3/32. So that's what size that drill bit is. And we can do that with any of our drill bits, and that's how a hole gauge works in terms of determining the size drill bit that we need. Now let's talk quickly about how a screw or a fastener works. What I have up here is kind of a simulated piece of wood. So the blue is our top piece of wood. In this case, our orange would represent a vertical piece of wood like this. And the purple over here would represent a horizontal one, which would match it. In either case, we're trying to use the fastener to attach the blue board to either the orange or the purple, okay? And so the idea is that the fastener comes down through, and on its way through, the head pulls the top blue board into the orange or the purple. So what you want is, when we're doing this, we have our screw up here. The idea behind the size of the hole is pretty simple. Through the top board, we need the size hole to basically be enough that the screw can pass through it, no problem. The only thing we don't want is for the head to pass through that blue board easily, because then it's not going to do anything. So the hole needs to be big enough for the screw to pass through, small enough that the head's going to catch on it. Down here in the orange board, we want to create a hole that's going to allow the threads of the screw to kind of dive into the board right there, okay? And so basically the threads bite into orange. As they're biting into it and I turn the screw in, the head is going to pull piece blue nice and snug to the orange. And it works the same way if our board is horizontal. We just have to be careful how long our screw head is. But basically that's the idea behind a screw. So now we've talked about where to find drill bits, how to identify the size of the different drill bits. whether they have it stamped on them or not. And the next question then becomes, depending on what screw we're going to be using, how do I decide what size hole to make with my drill bits? So here we have roughly the same length screw, and from here you can clearly see that the one on the right is far bigger than the one over here on the left. So how do I know what size hole to make? So we go back to our drill gauge, and we kind of use the same idea. Remember, we started big and we worked our way down. So there's kind of where it starts to catch right there, okay? And that is at 13/64 that we can see on the guide there. So if I were to drill, if I went back up one, right here at 7/32, if I were to drill that size hole, obviously my screw's not going to do any good for me. But that might be a decent size, if I was going through a hard piece of wood on the top piece. But as far as what we want the threads to bite into, that's no good. The next size down would be okay. What I always try to do is bump down a little bit bigger, or excuse me, a little bit smaller, because the idea is I can always drill a bigger hole. I can never, make that hole smaller. So I'm going to go up to, so I went from 7/32 where it passes through, down to 3/16, and then at 3/16, that's where I'm going to try drilling my hole. If when I drill that hole and I try to drive the screw, there's no way that it's going to fit, and it really just is going to split the board, drives really hard, I back the screw out, and then maybe I try to drill this 13/64. All right, so that's the bigger screw. Here's the smaller one. I'm going to go through the same process. How do I know what size hole to make? I'm working my way down. 5/32 went pretty easy. 9/64 went pretty easy. 1/8, it's starting to catch. So 9/64 is where it went through easy. I would start my pilot hole at 7/64, okay? If when I go to drive that screw, it is just way too tight and it's not gonna work, I go and get another drill bit at 1/8 and make that hole, ream it out a little bit bigger, all right? So 9/64 is where it's gonna go easy. That's not gonna help us because the screw won't do anything. We go down to 7/64, and that's where we're gonna try our first pilot hole. Okay, so then the final decision that you have to make then is, if we know what size holes that we need to create, what length screw do I need to use? And we'll have a lot of choices in the shop. Here are just a few of them, of course. And just to kind of let you know, number one, how do I determine the length of a screw? Very easily, get a ruler. And if I butt that up to where it says 0, I can see that that one goes all the way to 3 inches, okay? Here we have one that goes to 2 inches. I think that's another 2, another 2. There we have 1.5 inches. Now it's time to think about our projects. You guys are going to be putting together piece D at the top, up here, is going to go into piece A. Just like that. That is where we're going to use the screws to connect that particular joint. So what size screw do I need? We always want at least 1/2 inch of the screw to go into the bottom piece, and no more than probably 1 inch. So if I were to use this one, I have a full, let's see, that's a 3-inch screw and 1 1/4 material. So that leaves me 1 3/4 of the screw length going into this. That's too much, it's overkill. We don't need one that long. If I use the 2-inch screw, 1 1/4 material, that gives me 3/4 of the screw length into this, and that is what we're looking for. If I try the 1.5 inch, it doesn't give me enough. So we are going to be using 2-inch drywall screws, which are in the wood room, in the front of the room, and we'll kind of talk about those later. You can see that this screw is a Phillips bit, so I'll be pre-drilling for that 2-inch screw. And that particular screw, if I go back to my hole guide, working my way down, starting to catch at 9/64. So I might try 7/64 first, okay? If that feels like it is way too tight, I'm gonna back down and try the 1/8. And the 9/64 isn't gonna do me much good. It's gonna slip through way too freely. So depending on how hard your wood is, 7/64 or 1/8 inch hole. And we wanna go 2 inches deep total, okay? So we wanna have our hole go to about that length into this second piece. And we'll talk about how to drill our holes and things like that later.